Amidst the majestic Himalayas, known as the roof of the world, there is a land rich in religious, cultural, and spiritual freedom, which is Tibet. This place has long been separated from the rest of China, not only due to its rugged terrain but also because of its distinct history, language, and religious beliefs. However, since the mid-20th century, when Chinese troops entered, it entered a period of upheaval, designated as the Tibet Autonomous Region. Since then, this sacred land has become the center of ongoing controversies. They are under Beijing's control while nurturing aspirations to assert their unique identity. The clash between history, culture, and power has made Tibet's story not just a matter of borders or sovereignty, but also a global symbol of underlying conflicts and tensions. To better understand this issue, let's explore it together right now. Geography shapes Tibet's destiny. With an area of 1,228,400 square kilometers, the Tibet Autonomous Region is part of the Qinghai, a vast land of up to 2,500,000 square kilometers at an average altitude of 4,380 meters. It stretches like a giant platter in Asia, with the north bordered by the Kunlun Mountains, the east sloping down to the Yunnan Guzhou, the south marked by the majestic Himalayas with Mount Everest at 8,848 meters. Continuing to the west is the Karakoram Range. Moreover, it is one of the world's most extreme climate regions. Temperatures in Tibet fluctuate drastically between day and night, with daytime highs up to 20 degrees Celsius but dropping below 0 degrees Celsius at night, even in summer. Winters here are long, cold, and dry, while summers are short, cool, and sunny. The average annual rainfall is only about 100 to 500 millimeters, and concentrated mainly from June to September. These harsh conditions make much of Tibet arid or cold desert, deeply influencing the nomadic lifestyle, farming practices, and survival culture of its people. Specifically, Tibetans clearly structure their lives around the seasons. In summer, when snow melts and grasslands green on mountain slopes, they move with their livestock to high pastures for grazing. When winter comes, cold winds and heavy snow deplete the grasslands. Tibetans retreat to fixed villages at lower altitudes, often in sheltered valleys or along rivers. This cycle, with nomadic summers and settled winters, not only reflects livelihood flexibility but also forms the socio-cultural foundation of where people, livestock, and nature are intertwined in a life cycle on the world's roof. It's evident that with such harsh geography, Tibet is like a natural fortress, hard to access and penetrate. But it also makes the region impoverished and backward. This ruggedness explains why for centuries, they have maintained isolation and unique identity, not easily assimilated or fully conquered. Tibet is a land with a unique history spanning thousands of years. This land evolved through a complex flow of unification, fragmentation, and civilizational. For centuries, Tibetans chose a nomadic, insular lifestyle, with little contact with neighboring civilizations, creating a society deeply connected to nature and indigenous beliefs. It wasn't until the 7th century that the Tibetan Empire emerged under King Songtsen Gampo. He expanded territory across the plateau and built a unified state. This was a golden era when Buddhism was introduced from the south, blending with Bon beliefs, to form a unique Tibetan Buddhism, emphasizing meditation and esoteric yoga rituals. The empire peaked under King Trisong Detsen with an army of 200,000. They controlled lands from Central Asia to the Tang dynasty border, even attacking the capital Chang'an in 763, forcing the Tang to sign a peace treaty. From here, Buddhism was formalized by inviting Indian monks such as Padmasambhava, the founder of the Nyingma school, helping Buddhism blend with the indigenous Bon faith, creating the unique Tibetan Buddhism version. However, internal conflicts between the nobility and the monastic community led to the assassination of King Langdharma. Afterwards, the Tibetan Empire weakened and collapsed, leading to the fragmentation of the territory into small warring kingdoms for centuries. In contrast, ancient China was nurtured by the fertile plains along the Yellow and Yangtze rivers, where agricultural civilizations, writing, and stratified societies early. This promoted an early trend toward territorial unification, culminating in the Qin dynasty unifying the Central Plains in 220. Unlike the Tibetans, Han culture revolved around Confucianism, imperial order, discipline, and loyalty to the emperor and country, with religion placed as Emperor Taiwu, Northern Zhou. Later, the Song government also sought to restrict Buddhism by prohibiting new temple construction, strictly managing monks and nuns, and imposing land taxes. Overall, in China, there was no separation of religious and secular authority, with religion playing a secondary role, not diminishing over time. Confucianism was essentially a state ideology centered on the emperor and the imperial family, while the political landscape of the Tibetan plateau was decentralized, with power held by local lords and monks, especially after the Tibetan Empire. Buddhism in Tibet entered a flourishing period with a second wave of Buddhism transmitted from India. One key figure was Tsongkhapa, who restored monasteries and founded the Gelug school, emphasizing discipline and meditation. At the same time, new sects emerged, such as Sakya, backed by noble families. Kagyu with oral traditions from Marpa and Milarepa. And Nyingma continued to develop. This reflected political differences where religious authority was separate from secular. By the 13th century, the fragmentation ended with the intervention of the Mongol Empire. Then, Godin Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, appointed Sakya Gaudiya as the representative to govern Tibet, ushering in the Sakya dominance from 1249 to 1354. During this period, Sakya monks administered the region under Yuan dynasty patronage, while spreading Buddhism widely in China and Mongolia. After the 14th century, as the Yuan declined, local forces rose. The Fagmadrupa dynasty, led by Tai-Sigan Changchug Gyaltsen, established an army, rebuilt monasteries, and built a relatively stable state. But peace did not last as the Rinpoche dynasty overthrew Fagmadrupa, controlled the central region and supported the Karma Kagyu sect, increasing religious conflicts. By the 16th century, power shifted to the Sangma with its capital in Shagatsi. However, this chaos gradually ended with the rise of the Gelug school founded by Tsongkhapa. In 1642, the 5th Dalai Lama of the Gelug school defeated Sangpa and established the Ganden Phodrang government in Lhasa. Nearly a century later, they became a tributary of the Qing dynasty. Though under Beijing's supervision, they maintained autonomy in most internal affairs. In the 20th century, the Qing dynasty collapsed, creating a power vacuum. And in 1913, after Outer Mongolia declared independence, the 13th Dalai Lama also declared Tibet independent from China. We are a small, religious, and independent nation. A historical turning point came in 1949, when the People's Republic of China was founded, and the new government resolved to take Tibet. Under military and diplomatic pressure, the 14th Dalai Lama's government signed the 17th point, attempting to acknowledge Tibet as part of China but with promises to maintain traditional social and religious. However, implementation quickly led to conflict. The peak of discontent was the 1959 Tibetan uprising in Lhasa, aimed at resisting Chinese control. The uprising was brutally suppressed, causing the 14th Dalai Lama, with CIA assistance, to cross into India and establish a Tibetan government in exile in Dharamshala. He also declared the 17-point agreement invalid, citing that the Tibetan government and people were threatened with weapons. When the Cultural Revolution erupted, the people here continued to suffer. Thousands of Tibetan Buddhist monasteries were destroyed. Buddhist statues and lamas and monks were forced to return to secular life, labor, or undergo ID. Before 1959, Tibet had over 6,000 monasteries. But by the end of the Cultural Revolution, only fewer than 10 religious institutions remained operating. Additionally, Tibetan language and customs were heavily suppressed. Wearing traditional clothing, performing rituals, or organizing Buddhist festivals were all considered counter-revolutionary acts. Education and propaganda were used to synthesize the region, replacing religious values with Maoist thought. The situation only began to improve after 1978, when Deng Xiaoping came to power and relaxed policies with reforms and opening up. Some monasteries were restored, and Tibetan religious life was allowed to partially revive, though still under strict control from the central government. Accordingly, the Tibet Autonomous Region has a local government with a chairman usually being Tibetan. But real power lies with the secretary, a Han Chinese appointed by the central. This creates conflicts between Tibetans and Han Chinese, especially over religious freedom, culture. In particular, China always argues that since the Yuan dynasty, the central government has effectively exercised administrative control, but history shows that the Ming dynasty of the Han Chinese did not govern this land. In reality, the Yuan dynasty of the Mongols and the Qing dynasty of the Manchus allowed Tibet to maintain a theocratic system with the Dalai Lama as the spiritual leader. Therefore, alongside the independence movement, many support granting Tibet genuine autonomy, not just the nominal form as it is now. Unique cultural and belief system. As the roof of the world, Tibet currently has a population of about 3.7 million people and possesses a unique cultural identity. First, language is a key factor. Tibetan is a language of the Tibeto-Burman language family with a grammatical system. Vocabulary and structure very different from Chinese. This difference makes cultural assimilation, as losing the native language means losing the ability to transmit scriptures and indigenous knowledge. Ancient Tibetan script also originates from Sanskrit, reflecting historical and cultural ties. Similar to many other writing systems, it is a phonetic script, accurately representing the speech of the indigenous people. In the monastic system, scriptures are written in Tibetan, with complex transliteration systems, and many texts cannot be understood without knowledge of the native language, while Chinese is an ideographic script, requiring learners to memorize thousands of distinct characters that cannot represent. Moreover, nomadic culture is the core foundation of Tibetan identity, originating from the lifestyle of herding tribes on the vast Qinghai Tibet Plateau, where harsh geographical and climatic conditions have shaped a flexible and sustainable survival model. Thousands of years ago, Tibetans developed a nomadic lifestyle, migrating seasonally to find pastures for yaks, sheep, and goats. They rely on these animals for transportation, as well as for foods such as butter, milk, and cheese. And their wool for yarn or hides used for making clothes and tents. From this, traditional clothing like the long robe emerged. Nomadic life also gives rise to festivals such as the horse racing festival. This is not only a display of riding skills or a time for fun, but also an opportunity to strengthen community spirit. Today, nomadic culture conflicts with the Chinese government's assimilation policies because it is not easily controlled and is not tied to a fixed settlement model. Therefore, only about 40% of the population still maintains this lifestyle. On the nomadic foundation, religion entered and left a deep imprint, both supplementing and shaping spiritual values. Among these, Tibetan Buddhism is the soul of the regional identity, dominating with about 2,857,000 people, accounting for 78.5% of the population. Additionally, Tibetan Buddhism combines elements of Mahayana and Vajrayana along with esoteric practices. Tibetan Tantra focuses on transformation, enlightenment in one lifetime, using deep meditation techniques, tantric rituals, and a complex system of protective deities. It integrates mystical and indigenous elements, featuring protective gods, deities expressed through mandala images, seed syllables, dharma protectors, and rich ritual practices. Thus, religion permeates daily life, from Lake Nanso or Mount Kailash, where pilgrimage combines with nature exploration, to monasteries and stupas like Annan, Drepung, or Sera. Additionally, religion is expressed through symbols such as hanging prayer flags on mountains, spinning prayer wheels, thangka paintings, and festivals like Tibetan New Year or Saga Dawa, the celebration of Buddha's birthday. Tibetan Buddhism also has a reincarnation system, where lamas like the Dalai Lama and Panchen Lama are chosen through spiritual signs. This is a unique feature found nowhere else, making the region a spiritual center of Asia, attracting millions of pilgrims, thereby reinforcing Tibet's cultural status on the global map. It can be said that Tibetan Buddhism is not merely a doctrinal system but also a spiritual, philosophical, artistic, and lifestyle foundation of the entire community. If we compare the Tibetan cultural and belief system with the mainstream cultural and belief systems of China, we see a clear and unmistakable difference. Chinese culture, with its Confucian foundation, emphasizes social order, imperial authority, state rituals, the mandate of heaven, and royal power, while Tibet has its own system of doctrines and religious organization where the lamas themselves possess Moreover, Chinese culture is less influenced by indigenous deities and national worship, whereas Tibet has strongly localized religion, causing every assimilation effort to touch upon the human soul. Thus, when an ethnic group is forced to change its language, alter its worship, and abolish its monasteries, it's not just losing autonomy but also its soul. And these very factors have partly contributed to the movement's fighting for Tibet's independence. The independence movement of Tibet and Beijing's policies. The Tibetan independence movement is a symbol of ethnic struggle. It has undergone significant fluctuations, from relying on international support to considering internal peaceful strategies, as well as facing firm unification policies from Beijing. These movements gradually changed forms, from armed struggle to peaceful resistance. In the initial phase, after China took control of Tibet in 1950, the Tibetan independence movement received certain external backing, particularly from the US CIA. This agency once provided up to $1.7 million in funding, training, and weapons to Tibetan resistance groups, with the main aim of exerting strategic pressure on China during the Cold War and containing communism. Tibetan warriors were once taken to Colorado for training and then returned to conduct guerrilla warfare in the Himalayas. Last, as after US President Richard Nixon, Washington chose to open relations with Beijing to counterbalance the Soviet Union. Consequently, the CIA's Tibet program officially ended. To date, their responses haven't been truly intense but rather symbolic, and no country in the world recognizes Tibet as an independent nation, only as a land with many conflicts. Besides support from the US, the backing of the 14th Dalai Lama for the independence movement must be mentioned. Although he had to live in exile in India after the 1959 uprising, he still strongly supported liberation struggles for his homeland. However, since 1979, he shifted to a middle-way policy, calling for greater autonomy in religious, educational, and environmental matters. By 2023, he reaffirmed that Tibet is part of the People's Republic of China and that people only want more autonomy, not independence or separation from politics. Strategically, this is a step back, but it also reflects a desire to avoid armed conflict and promote dialogue. In contrast to the spiritual leader's policy, the masses, especially the youth, firmly demand complete independence. They carried this out through various forms, from protests in front of UN headquarters and Chinese embassies to social media campaigns. This movement is led by organizations like the Tibetan Youth Congress with over 30,000 global members, focusing on protests and international advocacy. On September 27, 2025, a protest event emerged outside the UN headquarters in New York. Free Tibet, China out. In that context, the Chinese government carried out numerous suppressions, especially under President Xi Jinping, who has led since 2002. He used measures to encourage intermarriage between Tibetans and Han Chinese, promoting Han migration into Tibet, as well as urbanizing the land, thereby gradually reducing the proportion of indigenous people in a race. Since 2013, Tibet has become one of the most strictly monitored territories in the world, as Beijing deployed a mass surveillance network. With thousands of facial recognition cameras in monasteries in major cities like Lhasa, along with a dense presence of permanent security and military forces. Additionally, political repression is evident through arbitrary detention campaigns, with thousands of political prisoners held without trial, including activists like Kashi Wangchuk, who was sentenced for advocating Tibetan language protection. A prominent issue is the assimilation policy through education. Since 2016, over 1 million Tibetan children have been separated from their families and forced to live in boarding schools. Among them, an estimated 100,000 to 150,000 children as young as 4 years old participate in boarding kindergartens. In these schools, Mandarin has been used as the main teaching language, while Tibetan and local history are eliminated, replaced by Han ideological systems. Children returning home on holidays only use Mandarin in communication and reject traditional family cuisine. Besides assimilation, boarding schools have recorded many cases of teachers assaulting Tibetan students. This leads to psychological trauma in children, affecting their comprehensive development. Furthermore, due to massive Han migration into Tibet, with economic development policies changing demographics, the minority ratio has significantly, causing Tibetans to worry about ethnic dilution. For example, in the capital Lhasa, up to 27% are Han Chinese, increased from 17% in 2000. Urbanization is also a key tool, with massive investment in infrastructure like the China Tibet Railway, also known as the Sky Road, completed in 2006. This is the world's highest railway, with a length of 1,956 kilometers, connecting the Tibet Autonomous Region with Qinghai Province. It also shortens travel time from Lhasa to Beijing to about 24 hours instead of the previous 41 hours. However, this route somewhat erases traditional nomadic life and enhances social control in Tibet. Not stopping there, Beijing expanded control globally by banning films and individuals supporting Tibet to prevent international influence. 7 years in Tibet. Kundan. But artistic activities in Tibet are almost frozen. Similarly, American actor Harrison Ford was banned for publicly supporting Tibet along with Richard Gere, Lady Gaga, Selena Gomez, and singer P-Hawk. Free Tibet. These measures not only restrict culture but also reflect a broader strategy of using economic power to influence global public opinion. Not only education or migration, Tibetan Buddhism is also a target of strong suppression and assimilation. Monasteries are forced to use Mandarin, rewrite scriptures, and reject the reincarnation process of lamas. Moreover, the religious activities of Tibetans are tightly controlled. For example, many people have been arrested for pilgrimaging to India to listen to teachings from the 14th Dalai Lama. In fact, these policies are not new, as in 1995, the 11th Panchen Lama, a 5-year-old boy recognized by the Dalai Lama, was expelled from his homeland, while the Chinese government installed another boy to hold the second highest position in Tibetan Buddhism. That is Tsen Norbu, who occasionally appears publicly but is not trusted by believers. Currently, the 14th Dalai Lama is 90 years old, causing international concern that there will be 2 15th Dalai Lamas in the future, one appointed by China, and one recognized by exiled Tibetan monks. Under increasing pressure, on March 10, 2008, in Lhasa, monks organized a peaceful march calling for religious freedom and an end to suppression. However, just a few days later, the situation escalated into riots when Tibetan crowds clashed with security forces, leading to many Han Chinese shops being attacked and some buildings set on fire. The Chinese government declared 23 deaths, but the actual number could be as high as 200 to 400 people. After the crackdown, many Tibetans self-immolated, expressing despair over China's control policies. According to international human rights organizations, from 2009 to now, over 160 Tibetans have and consider it a desperate message about freedom and threatened national identity. In summary, this is not just a political confrontation between the central government and border regions, but a clash between two different spiritual worlds. Tibetans not only demand territorial self-determination but, more importantly, they want to protect the value system they believe is the soul of their nation. That is the language, esoteric religion, reincarnated Lama system, indigenous customs, and sacred relationship with nature. Therefore, all of China's cultural assimilation policies, from language, emotions to rituals, are considered by Tibetans as infringements on their identity. What do you think about this issue? Please leave your opinions in the comment section below. Goodbye and see you in the next videos.